It's time for the Bulldogs preview, guys. We're going to kick it off with showing what their starting draw is going to be like. They're number 13 here on the screen. And a very interesting set of teams to kick it off with. Scoop, what do you reckon?
Yeah, bit of a mixed bag. Yeah, they've got a couple of easier teams with the Warriors and possibly the Seagulls first, but that is potentially Turbo's return game, so it might not be as easy as it seems. Whereas a couple of Storm, Cowboys, Rabbits games all in the first 6 rounds, so not an easy draw by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, for sure. And at Brookie Oval, that first one as well. So Brookie Oval into the Storm after that, and a brand new Tigers outfit. It's going to be very interesting. But this Dogs team, I find very interesting in itself. There's a bunch of guys coming over. That left side's going to look really strong, and are we going to see some natural improvement from guys like Burton, from a bunch of these players really? Like, are we going to see Raymond Fatale-Mariner's best? What's Kikau going to do in a new team? Is Karaz going to pop? What's Reid Marnie going to do? And the 9 position. There's so many questions in this team, and we're going to go through all of that right now. We'll start up top. So we've got Josh Addo-Carr in our first position there. Obviously a very awkward price at 5.14. Scoop, give us our thoughts.
Yeah, Josh Addo-Carr is one of the few wingers that can score pretty well, but he's already almost priced in where his ceiling is for next year. He scored 7th most tries last year. Unless you think he scores 30 like Alex Johnson last year, there's not much value here, I'd say.
Yeah, he could be like pick him up for a streak potentially if the Dogs start going nuts. Paul Alamotti,
yeah.
We've heard a fair bit about him in the preseason already, and a bunch of people will be having him in their team. But sounds like from the recent news, he might not be getting that spot. Give us a little scoop, Loggy.
Yeah, well, from everything up until now, it looked like he was the favourite to start at the vacant centre spots, opposite Braden Burns probably on the other centre. But we're getting word that one of the more recent training sessions had Jake Averillo at centre, not at fullback. And down the list a bit, we can see Perm at fullback instead. Now, he's a lot cheaper. It really pushes around the value and how your starting cheapies look.
Yeah, so basically the reason why we've been speaking about him is a young talent. So he definitely could come into contention at some point of the year. And we'll have to see what happens in the trials, but definitely keep him on your watch list. As Scoop's got here, he's got him down as a strong cash cow. So if he does get his opportunity, like we saw with guys like Jacob Karaz last year, he should be able to do pretty well, and probably dependent on which side. So that left center role is going to be pretty important, isn't it? And if Averillo does get it, he potentially could have some value as well, which we'll speak about him now. At 370k, obviously a pretty low average. We've seen what he's been able to do a little bit in that center position, also in the halfback position, which he definitely won't get this year. What are your thoughts on him, Scoop?
Yeah, Averillo at centre, he might be okay, but I don't think he's got 10 points of value in him. If he does stay back at fullback, I think he's got a little bit of value, but his scoring without tries was a lot of teen scores. So you'd have to think that he scores really well in a Bulldogs team, only with tries.
Okay. So we're looking for a fair bit of improvement from the Dogs for him to get that value. You're looking for him to get a 35. I suppose if he does play on that left edge and they start to fire, he could see that 10 points of value. I definitely see that. He has enough talent, and he's on that contract year. So it could mean big things for Averillo this year. I definitely see a chance of that happening. We got Bailey Biondi Odo, at 250k. So he's one of those guys that has come in and has done pretty well at times, but has had a very limited role. So if there was to be an injury to Reid Marnie or something, I think he could come in and play a role. But right now he's a void. Fa'amanu Brown we have in there. He seems very overpriced with a bunch of really good games last year. If we're going to pick him up, are we waiting to see a big drop in his price, I'd say?
Yeah, definitely. Well, he had a good run at the back end of the year with the Tigers, but at 533k, he's not going to be the starting hooker, and he'll get very little minutes and points off the bench at best. So he'll be one of the candidates to lose the most money this year, I'd say. So definitely not one to buy.
That's for sure. Yeah, so you'd say he'd be ahead of Biondi Odo, but Yeah, would he be on the bench? Potentially does, and even if he is there to start, his price will drop, and that'll be a great thing if we do see an injury. But again, not one to speak about at the moment. Braden Burns at 554k, it does seem very expensive. And what's the theory there with the extra price point, the 1.4 extra there?
Yeah, I really don't know. It's not really a change of club. It's not really much of anything. They've just put him up 30k or so, and his price point is now 38.7 instead of his average of 37.3. There is something slightly interesting about Braden Burns is that when he was at the Dogs back into last year, he almost had no scores below 30, which was surprising, but his ceiling wasn't that great. So there might be a little bit of improvement in the Dogs team, but especially with that, just a little bit of value chipped off, not really one to go for.
Yeah, well, he's someone that I really liked watching at the Bunnies when he first came on the scene. He's definitely he's pretty consistent. So, yeah, we'd probably want another shave of 5 or 6 price point there before we look at him. So Matty Burton, he's a very interesting one this year. Obviously, he was a keeper in the centre position, but he only has the half now, which makes complete sense. And at a 50.3 average, priced accordingly, could we see him increase on that in, hopefully, for their sake and all the Dogs fans' sake, a better team?
Yeah, well, I see no reason why he can't improve. We saw the middle of last year, he was absolutely on a tear, scoring lots of 60s, 70s, 80s even before tailing off at the back end. He could be more consistent with bigger weapons right next to him. Imagine Burton to kick out. Imagine all of the line breaks and stuff that could add to Burton's score. I reckon he could push towards high 50s if the Dogs do as well as we think they might.
Yeah, and at 718k, it's obviously fairly pricey if you're looking at other guys like Hines and Cleary as well, which we'll speak about in other videos. But yeah, I definitely think if you are going to play the double half gun combo, and I think he's got a bit of value as well. Declan Casey is a very interesting one. So price at 277, average of 24, and we actually see someone who is finally undervalued. Woohoo! 19.4 price point. Pretty much almost at base there. There's a chance that he gets one of those center positions, but it might also just be off the back of an injury. Would we agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think, well, Avarillo might get that now. I'd say outside of that, Alamotti's first up from what we can see, then maybe Skelton and Casey. It's hard to know who's in the pecking order this early in the preseason, but if he gets a run, it's definitely upside. He was a very interesting fantasy scorer last year. I think he scored like 15 in 80 minutes, 60 in 80 minutes, and then like -1 in an injured game. So it's really hard to project him, but at base price, he's surely got some value.
Yeah, and yes, that we're talking about that center position, but he could end up on the wing as well, which we'll find out how it goes. They got the fullback spot that's up for grabs as well, so plenty happening there. We've got Brandon Clark. Do we know much about him?
No, I think he's mostly depth and up and coming. With Brown, Biondi Odo coming back later in the year, there's just no room for him, even as a backup.
Yeah. Andrew Davey, a crowd favourite, he's of mine anyway. He comes over at 463 with a bunch of good scores last year for the Manly boys, but that left edge, we know Billy Kickow is going to be there. So he's there as some cover at the moment, some bench depth. Do we think he gets a bench position?
I think he's probably one of the favourites for probably the last bench position, but definitely not any fantasy value. He's not going to score 30 points, let alone improve on his average from last year with that amazingly stacked Dogs forward pack now.
Yeah, so let's have a little bit of chat about that while we're here. So we've got Billy Kickow, we've got Fatala Mariner, we have Pangai Jr., all kind of fighting for an edge position. Middles is it just Luke Thompson that gets coverage, which we'll speak about him. They got Corey Waddell. There's a bunch of different players that could play on these edge and the middle. How do you think it'll line up?
It's so hard to predict. At this stage, I would probably have Max King and Luke Thompson as the props.
Yeah.
TPJ as one of the edges and Ryan Sutton at lock. And it's hard to know that last edge position, whether Fatala Mariner gets the start, whether he plays a couple of minutes there from the bench when TPJ goes off and stuff like that.
Didn't even mention Sutton, so yeah, crazy. The depth that they've got there. And even Fatala Mariner, where do you find does he come off the bench?
It's hard to say. Hey, I think he's good enough he has to be in the squad somewhere, giving some value. I'd say his best shot is to be that 30 minutes of edge if TPJ moves into the middle for a little bit at the end of his stint. Otherwise, it's hard to see him doing a lot this year.
Yeah, might get an opportunity at some point, but it might be good for his price to pop down a bit to give us some value anyway. Cole Flanagan had an improved year when he finally got a chance last year. Do we see any value in him at 456?
Look, you'd have to think better team, better scoring, but Burton's just so dominant that it's really hard to see Flanagan having a ceiling anywhere near giving him value. So I don't think he'll score 40, for example, and he's priced at 32. Don't really want to borrow him.
Yeah, Sam Hughes will be there for some depth. We got Billy Kickout. Do we just put a pen through him? Just a bit too expensive and in a lesser team, unfortunately, than the Panthers.
Yeah, the Dogs team looks really exciting, but Penrith is number one. Kickout doesn't really have upside.
Nope. And Maxi King at 657. He was obviously a revelation last year. We all loved him. Averaged 46. He had a bunch of games where he got great minutes and amazing scores over 50. And then there was times he didn't get the minutes and was a little bit inconsistent with that. Do we see him getting a big minute role this year?
I think starting the year with a full preseason after a breakout year like that, I think he's got a big role to play. I just don't think there's much in it for him fantasy-wise. I'm interested to see what he does this year in NRL.
Yeah. Would you say the minutes probably aren't there with guys like Sutton and Luke Thompson being pretty big forwards?
Not with the additions, because I think Luke Thompson was out for personal reasons for a bunch of last year too, so that could even hurt Max King a little bit. So definitely not one to get on board for fantasy.
Not at this stage anyway, yeah. Jacob Carraz at 563, a little bit too expensive after his breakout year as well.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit surprised he isn't one of the names being floated around to play fullback, because I think he could be a really good player there. At this stage, at his price as a winger, I don't really want much of him. He's got a good ceiling, but as a winger, he has a really low base. He'll score you those 20s if nothing's on for the Bulldogs in a tough game.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I just brought out the Hooker Guns video, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on Reid Marnie while we're here.
Yeah, I was initially reasonably bullish on him, but I had a look back at his stats, and he really was a 2021 Volandis ball beneficiary. All the other years that he's played 80 minutes hooker has been high 40s, so I don't. He's gone from the top 4 Eels to a good Bulldogs team, but there's no real upside for him, I'd say.
Okay, so I'm obviously scared of him after last year, but I definitely see some upside. But that information there on 2020 and before that is big, and maybe that was just a flash in the pan year because he didn't look like getting super involved last year. Yeah, maybe it's a similar situation to Brandon Smith. Maybe it's a similar situation to how Bennett uses those teams. Was getting it out to your gun halves and letting them play. It's going to be interesting. I personally hope that if I don't pick him, he averages somewhere around this. People that pick him up don't lose on him, but if he averages 60 again, I'm going to cry a lot.
I could see him averaging pretty much bang on 50, to be honest. I think with the club change not hanging over his head, and there's reasonably exciting dog teams, he won't go down, but I don't think he goes up that much.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ockenbaugh, any interest in him? Does he start? No.
Not with Carraz. I don't think he'll have a huge role this year. He'll come in if there's some injuries, I'd say. But as we saw, he's very low floor player.
Yeah. Tavita Pangai, I'd love to hear your thoughts on him.
Yeah, well, he's a tough one to predict. He's probably the person in the whole Dogs pack where you don't know where he goes, because he could play prop, but probably won't. He could play lock, but he probably won't. I could see him playing at the edge for most of the game before a few minutes at the middle. And his offloading ability is almost second to none in the NRL. He's got some huge attacking upside. He scored plenty of 50s and 60s last year with a 28 in the middle. So if he can get a little bit more consistency in a better Dogs team, I think he could be pretty good. He's hard to predict. I think he can be a cash cow, but you're going to be riding the roller coaster until he's made that cash.
Yeah, there's going to be a time where he makes a quick 150k or something, but he'll lose it quickly, or he'll struggle at the start. He'll get sent off or whatever it is. You look at that average of 41.5, and you see the scores that he picked up at certain times last year, and it's like, how did he average 41? So you're probably going to sit there and be scratching your head at some point as to why he's averaging so low on a 3 or 5 game basis. So he's very scary, but you can see why everyone's so interested in him every time at this part of the year. So very, very interesting. We got Patolo on the bench, we'd imagine. Does he get a game, or does Franklin Pele, who we'll speak about next? Well, we speak about both of them at the same time. What do you think of those two?
I think they might actually play a reasonably similar role. I think Patolo and Pele both can be that low minutes prop player, that 20, 30 minutes. And Pele, out of the two, is definitely the one you would even consider if that was to be the case, because is he the biggest man in the NRL? He's like close to 130 kilos, an absolute wrecking ball. If he can get 25 minutes and do Max King PPM and score 35 from that, that'd be awesome. But it is definitely a risk.
Yeah, my roommate went to school with him. He's always a massive boy. So he's been in the NRL in the fringe for a couple of years now. So is this the time that he does get his spot? Max King, as you said, had that similar scenario for a while. So maybe it is, but we'll find out more in the trials, obviously. Hayes Perham. So there's definitely a lot to speak about regarding him. Does he potentially get that one position? He's someone that played a decent amount over the last year. Has he played 2 years ago as well? Good question.
I can't remember if he played much a couple of years ago, but he has been pushing on the fringes for a little bit.
Yeah.
I think he's hard to predict. At fullback, I think he's probably worth at that price. At a sub 300k fullback, if he starts, I think you have to grab him. He has had low scores in the past, but I think the most recent season was averaging mid-30s. So there's still upside there if you want to go for him.
Yeah, you definitely roll the dice there for a guy under 300 starting fullback in a decent side for sure. We'll find out a little bit more as we go along. But Jacob Preston and Skelton, you've both got in bold. Tell us a little bit about those two.
Yeah, Preston, look, I think when the Dogs just kept signing and signing players, his value's probably gone down and down a little bit, but he scores really well in New South Wales Cup and at base price. If he gets any sort of minutes at some point through the year, like if a couple of the Bulldogs players go off to Origin, for example, if Matt Burton gets a bench role, or like there's a couple of games where he can score 1 or 2 50s and make 100k before you move him on, he's an option, but he's a risky one. You'd have to hope there's a lot of injuries before getting on Preston.
Okay, and Skelton as well. Obviously, one of the guys that's vying for that centre spot. Much to say about him? Have you watched much of him play?
I've seen a little bit of him, but mostly only from highlights videos. I think, like Alamotti, it'll just be plug and play cheapy if he starts round one. Huge upside at base price. Lock him in if he's there.
Cool. And potentially a chance at some point during the year. Ryan Sutton, I actually have a fair bit of interest in. He had a bit of a weird scenario there with Ricky at the Raiders, which a lot of players do, but he is someone that when he does play big minutes, he has plenty of scoring potential and plenty of cash to be made at 491 with a 34 average. I could definitely see him, if he does get the minutes, averaging somewhere in the 40s, which would give you plenty of upside in a mid position, which this year actually does seem like there's going to be a few options, but it might be a position where you don't have to go very high in terms of your money spending and use a couple of these middles. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I quite like him if he gets the lock position. I think if he can jag 50 minutes, that'll be enough for him to get mid 40s. He's got a good work rate. He's not the craziest PPM absolute machine like TPJ at prop or middle, for example, but he's a really good addition to this Dogs team. We've got a lot of fire. He's a really good solidifier, I'd say, and good for fantasy if he gets that 50 minutes.
Yeah, he's definitely on the watch list for me. And Luke Thompson, so thankfully for him, a bit of a full preseason. So we've seen him play big minutes at times and score really well. The 612k price tag does seem like a slight worry for me because you're looking for him to score over a 50 average. And I'm just not sure if he can get there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's got a handful of points, but he's just not going to be that good value. He played enough games last year that he's priced in at his average. He's got no discount. Full preseason will benefit him, but with all of the forwards that the Dogs have recruited, I don't think he gets a massive uptick.
That makes sense. I'm just about to speak about Jackson Torpney in one of my videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts there, Lockie, on him if he does get an opportunity at some point.
Yeah, well, he's a pretty good player. I don't know a heap about him, but if he somehow starts at second row, he's a pretty good scorer. At this stage, I don't think he's going to be super relevant. If he can get a desirable role, he'll be a great buy.
Yeah. And then Corey Waddell to finish, very awkward price, kind of comes in and does a job, averages 30 to 40 when he does get that opportunity, but I doubt he gets anywhere near a starting spot, probably a bench one from here. So that's the Dogs. How would you like to wrap this up, Lock?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty much go for the safe options, and if you want to be spicy, go for Burton. There's going to be at least someone that has value no matter how the Bulldogs backline lines up, whether it's Alamotti, whether it's Perham, whether it is Skelton. There's going to be somebody there who's cheap, and possibly Matt Burton has a really good ceiling, but do you buy him with so many good premium halves to start the year? That's going to be the question when you can balance your squad.
Yeah, I can definitely see 1 to 2 players being in my squad. Yeah, at least during the preseason, but with that round 1 team, there'll be, either that center spot or that fullback spot. Most people will have one of those players. And then it's, whether you go Burton or Ryan Sutton, I'm seeing at the moment, or Reid Marnie, sorry, as the 3 interesting options there. That's the Dogs, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. We will move on to the Cowboys next. Yes.